A while ago, I started noticing something funny. Every time somebody asks about getting tier 5, as a free-to-play player, the answer were completely different. One player would say theatries are the problem, another player would say arrows are the problem, then somebody else would say none of those matter because speed-ups are the real bottleneck, and the weirdest things was that all of them sounded confidently, which made me wondering something. How can players be talking about the same goal and have completely different answers about what's stopping them? Because somebody has to be wrong, or at least that's what I thought at first. But then I realized something. The problem isn't that the players disagree. The problem is that they're often talking about different versions of the game. And once I understand that, a lot of tier 5 advice start making a lot of more sense. For the longest time, if you ask free-to-play player what was stopping them from reaching tier 5, a lot of them would immediately say arrows. And honestly, I remember hearing that constantly. People complained about arrows everywhere. And I even personally make a video how I farm like, I think 2000 arrows in one of my videos. And to be fair, today the things are way more different. But anyway, players farmed Darklings easily. People planned around arrows. People worried about arrows. And if you were playing back then, the advice made perfect sense. The problem is that many players keep repeating that advice long after the game change. And I want to point out something else, especially for the spenders back in the days, is that Theatry was easy to be get because it was available from the VIP shop when you're basically getting your Lilia bundles. Here, for example, we have like 600 Theatry. Here we're having like 800 Theatry, which is a decent number at the end of the day. And that's where the things get interesting, because if arrows aren't the bottleneck anymore, what replaced them? Then I start seeing another group of players. Those players weren't talking about arrows at all. They were talking about theatries. Everything was theatries. Every conversation somehow end up with theatries. And honestly, I believe that too for a while. Because theatries are powerful. You look at the requirements and immediately understood why people hate them. The number felt ridiculous. The grinding felt endless. For a long time, theatries generally were one of the biggest wall standing between players and tier 5. And this applied also for me. Back in the days, I just get Lilia because of the theatris. I mean, one of the reasons was because of the theatris. It may sound funny, but I awake my Lilia because of the theatris. Because I decide, should I actually wake Lilia or not? But the things change. And one of the things that change was how you actually get those theatri. And generally, that was the biggest wall that I was having from the tier 5. But then I start noticing something strange. Some players who already had plenty of theatries were still nowhere near tier 5. And that creates another question. If theatries aren't stopping them anymore, what failed? That's where I think a lot of players discover the real bottleneck. And this is speed ups. And the reason this one is dangerous is because it's less obvious. If you keep missing arrows, you know it. If you keep missing theatries, you know it. But speed ups are different. And one of the reasons for this is you're not seeing that, because to make a College of Order level 25, basically the level you need to make Wand of Plenty from level 7 to level to make this supply chain, level 10, you're going to need fully level 25 academy. And from there, when you go, you're going to unlock assault strategy from level 7 and above. And you didn't know this one, you didn't know this one, you didn't know this one. And from there, you don't know any of this. So the only thing you're seeing is actually just the theatris. But speed ups are different. You can feel like you're making progress while quietly falling years behind. And that's what surprised me. Because the closer some players get to tier 5, the less the discussion become about materials and more about time. Actual time, months of times, sometimes years of time. And suddenly the entire strategy changed. Because now the question isn't how do I get more theatris? The question become, am I spending my speedups correctly? And that's much more harder question. That's where I think many free-to-play players incidentally hurt themselves. They solve the bottleneck everybody talk about instead of the bottleneck that actually have. Those are not always the same thing. I've been seeing players obsess over one resource while quietly wasting another. And because the missing resource gets all the attention, the real problem goes unnoticed. This is why blanket advices is so dangerous. That's why blanket advices are so dangerous. A player who lacks theatris needs one strategy. A player who lacks speedups needs a completely different strategy. A player who is whack arrows might need something entirely different. Yet many players are following advice designed for somebody else's account. And that can delay progression far more from people realizing. Then I noticed something that completely changed how I think about the tier 5 progression. The strongest free-to-play players aren't necessarily farming harder. They identify the bottlenecks faster. That's a huge difference. Most players see a wall and start pushing. The best players stop and ask, what actually causing the wall? Because solving the wrong bottleneck is one of the most expensive mistakes in the strategy games. You can spend months optimizing the wrong thing, and by the time you realize, those months are gone. That's why two free-to-play players can play for the same amount of time and end up in completely different positioning. One player is solving today problem, other player is solving last year problem, and the gap keep growing. What surprised me most is that many of the arguments about tier 5 are actually true. I mean, arrows are bottleneck, theatris are bottleneck, speedups are bottleneck. The mistakes is assuming the answer never change. Because Call of Dragons change, events change, drop rates change, your account change, your kingdom change, your progression change. And if your strategy doesn't change with it, eventually you're optimizing the wrong thing. So I'm curious, if you're a free-to-play player and still chasing tier 5, what do you honestly believe is the biggest bottleneck right now? Arrows, theatry, speedups, something else entirely? Because the biggest lesson I took away from those discussions wasn't which resource is hard to get. It was realizing that most dangerous bottlenecks isn't the one slowing your progress. It's the one you haven't identified yet. Anyway guys, that is for this video. Huge thank you to all channel members for supporting the channel. If you do like to support the channel as well, you can check out the join button below. Members get early access to videos, exclusive content, member shoutouts, and Warwords member can reach me out directly for strategy and account advices. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one.